The prison medical facility buzzed with controlled routine until Warden Thompson's suspicion reached its breaking point. "Verify her credentials again, Nurse Patterson," he commanded, doubt clear in his voice. The unremarkable woman in standard medical scrubs knelt beside the prisoner's cot while changing a routine bandage when the inmate performed one action that changed everything. The effect was immediate. The guard's clipboard slipped from his hands, hitting the concrete floor. Senior staff froze at their monitoring stations and faces drained of color throughout the facility. No one had expected a maximum security prisoner to salute a contract nurse. No one had expected the quiet woman with basic clearance to be recognized by a convicted war criminal. No one had expected the truth. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story captivated you, please consider subscribing. We share powerful stories of unsung heroes every week. The Federal Prison Medical Wing hummed with the constant buzz of security systems and muted conversations. Banks of monitors cast harsh light across vigilant faces, illuminating patient charts dotted with red security alerts and yellow medical warnings. The air carried the scent of antiseptic and industrial cleaners, mixed with the tension that came with treating dangerous inmates. It was 0900 hours on what had begun as a routine morning shift at Federal Correctional Institution Blackstone, carved into the mountainous terrain of Colorado. Contract nurse second-class Sarah Collins sat at her assigned medical station, deliberately unremarkable in her standard white scrubs and regulation identification badge. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, no visible markings except for medical certification tags. Early 30s, with a professional face that spoke of competence rather than authority. Her blue eyes moved constantly between patient files and medical equipment, while her presence demanded nothing from the security around her. To a casual observer, she might have been any healthcare worker, a recent hire from civilian medical services perhaps, or another face in the endless rotation of contract staff. She occasionally made notes in a standard medical chart, her handwriting neat and precise. Unlike the guards and senior staff who filled the medical facility with their security badges and correctional experience, she wore no visible markers of law enforcement training or federal clearance. Just a nurse, it seemed, with basic medical credentials and an assignment to treat routine injuries. The medical rounds underway involved standard care for prisoner 47,291 Beta, formerly Colonel Victor Petrov, a convicted war criminal serving life for crimes against humanity. The treatment had proceeded through normal phases: initial assessment, wound cleaning, and now bandage replacement for injuries sustained during a recent altercation. Chief Medical Officer Williams, a veteran prison healthcare coordinator with something to prove, managed the medical protocols with practiced efficiency, moving between treatment areas and checking status displays throughout the medical floor. Prisoner Petrov had established patterns of non-cooperation that made treatment challenging, Williams explained to the shift supervisor, his voice carrying across the medical bay. His refusal to follow medical instructions created complications for standard care procedures. Warden Thompson sat rigid at the security console, his face a careful mask. A decorated corrections officer with 25 years of service, he looked somehow troubled in his administrative uniform, as if the weight of managing dangerous inmates had physically aged him in recent years. Sarah watched it all, her expression revealing nothing. Only the occasional glance toward the prisoner containment area suggested any emotional response to the ongoing procedures. When the shift supervisor called for a medical update, heads turned in mild surprise as Sarah raised her hand slightly from her position at the treatment station. Nurse Collins has been managing routine wound care, Chief Medical Officer Williams announced. She may have additional assessment of the prisoner's medical status. She moved to the prisoner treatment area with a deliberate precision that seemed at odds with her contract status. Something about her bearing, spine straight, steps measured, chin level, caught the attention of a graying guard captain. Seated near the main display, he frowned slightly, studying her with newfound interest. Warden Thompson, sharp-eyed and methodical, watched her with narrowed attention as she prepared her medical assessment. The warden was known for his no-nonsense approach to prison security and inmate management. Today, he wore his authority like a burden, his administrative uniform crisp despite the early hour. "Please state your medical findings for the record," instructed Warden Thompson. Contract nurse second-class Sarah Collins, Medical services specialist, she replied. Her voice was soft but clear, her professional bearing perfect. Chief Medical Officer Williams began his questioning, and Sarah's responses were factual and precise, but delivered in such a measured, quiet tone that Warden Thompson soon grew visibly impatient. Several times, the medical recorder had to ask her to repeat her statements. Nurse Collins, Warden Thompson finally interrupted. The entire medical staff needs to hear your assessment clearly. Please speak up. Yes, Warden, Sarah responded, barely raising her volume. Chief Medical Officer Williams continued. Nurse Collins, can you explain your treatment approach for prisoner Petrov's injuries? I've been providing standard wound care and monitoring healing progress according to established medical protocols, she replied, her voice still frustratingly soft. I've identified several factors that affect treatment effectiveness based on the prisoner's cooperation level. And what were your findings during treatment sessions? I determined that the prisoner's injuries respond normally to standard medical intervention. I also noted significant behavioral patterns during treatment that indicate potential security considerations. Did you document these observations? Yes, I logged all medical responses and attempted behavioral assessment through available prisoner psychology files. Was this analysis reviewed by security personnel? It was not forwarded beyond my immediate medical supervisor. The security officer, Major Patricia Voss, approached for additional questioning with a skeptical demeanor. Tall and imposing with steel-gray hair that lent her an air of authority, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to challenging questionable medical assessments. Nurse Collins, what specific correctional training qualifies you to analyze prisoner behavioral patterns? I completed basic inmate interaction protocols during my contract medical orientation. And what level of security experience? Her tone suggested the answer would confirm Collins's limitations. I maintain appropriate clearance levels for contract medical personnel, Sarah responded evenly. Major Voss smiled thinly. Nurse Collins, how could you possibly understand the complexities of maximum security prisoner psychology and behavioral assessment when you've been treating inmates for only 6 weeks? Something flickered across Warden Thompson's face. A brief shadow of recognition quickly suppressed. He studied Sarah more intently now. Objection to characterization, Chief Medical Officer Williams called out. Nurse Collins's medical assessments should be evaluated on merit. Sustained, Warden Thompson replied, his eyes never leaving Sarah. Major Voss adjusted her approach. Let me rephrase. What specific experience do you have with high-security prisoners in correctional environments? Sarah paused before answering, her eyes briefly meeting those of the graying guard captain near the main display. My background includes some practical application of prisoner medical care, she said carefully. Could you be more specific? That information involves previous contracts that may not be relevant to current treatment requirements. Major Voss looked to the commanding officer. Warden, if the nurse lacks relevant experience with maximum security prisoners, her behavioral assessments of Petrov should be considered accordingly. I'll allow the line of questioning, Warden Thompson ruled. Nurse Collins, please provide more detail about your relevant experience. Sarah's expression remained neutral. My previous medical experience involves classified contract programs. How convenient, Major Voss remarked dryly. So we're expected to trust your prisoner assessments without knowing your actual qualifications to treat dangerous inmates? I'm reporting on medical observations I made using established healthcare protocols. As the questioning continued, Sarah responded with increasingly precise details about prisoner psychology, security protocols, and medical procedures that made several correctional officers in the facility exchange glances. She referenced specific behavioral indicators, medical configurations, and security measures that seemed beyond the knowledge base of a standard contract nurse. When shown prisoners' psychological profiles, her eyes lingered on them a moment longer than necessary, her composure wavering almost imperceptibly before returning to professional detachment. Do you recognize these prisoner assessment files, Nurse Collins? Major Voss asked. Yes, they represent the psychological profiles I reviewed for medical treatment planning. And your analysis of these profiles proved to be, what exactly? The behavioral observations you made about prisoner Petrov. How does that affect current security protocols? Sarah's voice remained steady. The behavioral assessment I conducted indicated prisoner responses that weren't reflected in current security evaluations. My observations about cooperation patterns were documented in my medical reports. In the medical facility, The older guard captain with gray hair and multiple service ribbons watched Sarah with growing intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration as if trying to place a half-remembered face from security briefings. The morning hours passed as Chief Medical Officer Williams returned for follow-up questions, asking Sarah about specific treatment requirements for the current case. Can you explain the standard protocols for treating a maximum security prisoner of this classification? Williams asked. The medical team would have established primary and secondary treatment procedures with security oversight, she explained, her voice still frustratingly soft. Standard protocol requires verified identification and clearance confirmation at predetermined security levels. And if those procedures were compromised or insufficient, the backup protocols would proceed using alternative treatment methods after primary security was assessed, utilizing specialized medical procedures on confirmed security systems, she explained with a level of technical precision that raised eyebrows among the medical staff present. Warden Thompson leaned forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. Nurse Collins, I've asked you repeatedly to speak up. This medical facility cannot properly evaluate assessments it cannot hear clearly. I apologize, Warden, Sarah replied, her volume barely increasing. The older guard captain in the facility now sat forward at his workstation, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Recognition seemed to be dawning slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to alarm. Major Voss seized on the warden's frustration. Perhaps Nurse Collins's reluctance to speak clearly reflects her limited confidence in her own medical assessments. Chief Medical Officer Williams stood immediately. Ma'am, that's inappropriate speculation. Noted. Chief, Warden Thompson replied sharply. Major Voss, confine your remarks to relevant questions for the nurse. Major Voss nodded in acknowledgement. Nurse Collins, in your assessment as a medical professional, was there anything about prisoner Petrov's treatment that indicated modified security requirements? Sarah looked directly at the main security display for the first time. The medical assessment suggested behavioral modifications beyond current security estimates. That wasn't my question. Based on what you observed, should security procedures have been modified? Based on the behavioral patterns I identified, yes. But my assessment was not included in security planning. Major Voss's expression hardened. Are you suggesting that medical information was deliberately ignored by security staff? I'm stating that the behavioral analysis I provided differed significantly from the security assessment that was distributed to correctional personnel. The medical facility stirred with murmurs. Warden Thompson tapped his pen once against his desk, restoring order. Nurse Collins, Warden Thompson said, his voice tight with growing impatience. You'll need to explain that assertion clearly and audibly for the medical staff. What specifically was different about your analysis? Sarah paused, her eyes scanning the medical facility briefly before returning to the warden. When she spoke, her voice remained soft, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear. My behavioral analysis indicated that prisoner Petrov exhibited recognition patterns using responses normally reserved for military command situations. That information was not included in the security briefing provided to correctional personnel. Warden Thompson's head snapped up, his carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time. The graying guard captain's expression darkened as he studied Sarah with new intensity. Nurse Collins, Warden Thompson said firmly, frustration evident in his tone. This is the final time I will ask you to speak louder. The entire medical staff must be able to hear treatment assessments accurately. Sarah looked directly at Warden Thompson. A look of quiet recognition passed between them, though the warden quickly masked it with professional detachment. The veteran guard captain in the facility was now gripping his workstation, his knuckles white. Warden Thompson finally interrupted with visible impatience, leaning forward at his administrative console. Nurse Collins, we don't have all morning. Speak louder or we'll assign prisoner treatment to other medical personnel. The medical facility fell silent. For the first time since beginning her assessment, Sarah looked directly at Warden Thompson. A look of quiet recognition passed between them, though the warden quickly masked it. The graying guard captain near the security display leaned forward, his hands gripping his workstation. Suddenly, Sarah knelt beside prisoner Petrov's cot to replace his bandage, rolling up her sleeve to access her medical supplies. As she worked, a small military tattoo became visible on her wrist, the insignia of an elite special forces unit. Prisoner Petrov, The hardened war criminal who had refused to cooperate with anyone for months saw the tattoo and his eyes widened in unmistakable recognition. Slowly, despite his restraints, he struggled to sit up and rendered a perfect military salute. The effect was immediate and electric. Warden Thompson's pen fell from his fingers, clattering loudly on his desk. Several medical staff physically straightened at their workstations as if witnessing something impossible. Major Voss's face drained of color. The graying guard captain near the security display stood up involuntarily, then slowly sat back down. Complete silence fell over the medical facility as recognition dawned across various faces. Some looked confused, others shocked, and a few, those who understood the significance of what they had just witnessed, appeared stricken. Sarah continued in her normal soft voice, but now everyone was straining to hear. Prisoner Petrov recognizes that tattoo because I was the interrogation specialist who captured him during Operation Iron Shield 6 years ago. I was also the intelligence officer attached to Task Force Nightfall, which Warden Thompson personally coordinated 4 years before Petrov's conviction and imprisonment. She methodically produced a worn, waterproof identification case from her medical bag and held it up for the staff to see. This contains classified military records from Operation Iron Shield, not the sanitized reports filed with Correctional Administration. Prisoner Petrov isn't just a war criminal serving time. He's the same enemy commander who betrayed my unit after we discovered his connection to weapons trafficking across the Balkan corridor. Warden Thompson attempted to call for order, but found his voice failing him. Nurse Collins, this is highly irregular procedure for medical assessment. My unit and I were declared missing in action during Operation Iron Shield. Sarah continued calmly. I was the only survivor. I've spent 5 years working under assumed identity and waiting for another assignment to intersect with the same criminal network, not for revenge, but to prevent other soldiers from being endangered by the same intelligence failures that destroyed my team. A younger medical technician near the treatment stations looked up in confusion. This is impossible. Lieutenant Collins was declared MIA in Operation Iron Shield. I processed military casualty reports myself. The graying guard captain turned to address him. Stay at your position, officer, he said quietly. Look at that prisoner's response. War criminals don't salute medical contractors. Sarah opened her identification case to reveal military records, deployment patches, and classified documentation. My unit was betrayed because we discovered Colonel Marcus Kane was facilitating weapons transfers to enemy commanders through a network of compromised intelligence sources, the same network that provided the false information leading to Petrov's escape from initial capture. The medical facility erupted into controlled chaos. Warden Thompson tapped his pen repeatedly on his desk, finally restoring some semblance of order. His face had lost all color, and his hand trembled visibly. This medical facility will pause current operations for 15 minutes, he declared, his voice unsteady. But before anyone could move, Sarah spoke again. With respect, Warden, prisoner Petrov has been in custody for 3 years based on incomplete intelligence. I've waited 5 years to speak. But the criminal network that destroyed my unit is still operating through compromised channels within the correctional system. Warden Thompson slowly leaned back in his chair, his authority visibly shaken. He nodded once, a gesture of reluctant permission. Operation Iron Shield was classified above top secret, Sarah continued. Our mission was to identify and capture enemy commanders facilitating weapons trafficking across Eastern European borders. We traced the network to a compound near Belgrade, where we found Petrov coordinating arms sales. What we also discovered was a sophisticated intelligence operation with communication records linking directly to Colonel Kane and his network of compromised sources. She turned her identification case and removed an encrypted data chip. This contains interrogation transcripts, weapons serial numbers, and intelligence communications. We transmitted this evidence before we were compromised. That transmission was intercepted and our extraction was canceled. Our unit was left to die. Major Voss stood, her voice hollow. I received direct confirmation from Colonel Kane that Iron Shield unit had been confirmed MIA. The extraction was called off due to impossible tactical conditions. We weren't missing, Sarah said simply. We were very much alive and calling for immediate extraction. I heard your voice on the command frequency, Major Voss. You sounded confused, but you relayed the abort order. Chief Medical Officer Williams approached Sarah cautiously. Lieutenant Collins, if what you're saying is true, how did you survive? And why assume a false identity for 5 years? Sarah's composure never wavered, though prisoner Petrov remained sitting at attention, still maintaining his salute. I survived because I was separated from my unit during the final assault on our position. I was wounded, unconscious, presumed dead along with the others. Local civilians found me and kept me hidden while I recovered. By the time I was functional again, the official story was established. My unit was missing, the operation had been compromised, and Colonel Kane had been promoted to intelligence oversight. She looked around the medical facility, meeting the eyes of several senior staff members. I needed time to gather evidence that couldn't be easily buried again. I needed to understand who knew about the weapons trafficking and who was simply following compromised orders. Most importantly, I needed to make sure no other soldiers would die because of the same corruption. The Graying Guard captain approached the central treatment area. Warden, request permission to address the medical staff. I am Captain James Martinez, retired military police. I was the security liaison for the Iron Shield operation. He turned to face Sarah. Lieutenant Collins was one of the finest intelligence officers I ever worked with. If she says her unit was betrayed, I believe her without question. Major Voss interjected. This is all highly dramatic, but it has no direct bearing on current correctional operations. Prisoner Petrov is serving his sentence according to established legal procedures, not some conspiracy from years ago. They're connected, Sarah replied, glancing at Petrov, who slowly lowered his salute but remained sitting at attention. Petrov's capture and conviction were orchestrated to silence him before he could testify about the same weapons trafficking network. His imprisonment ensures he can't expose the ongoing criminal operation. History repeating itself. Different mission, same betrayal, same source. She pulled another document from her identification case. This is an intelligence summary showing that my unit reported weapons trafficking evidence directly to Colonel Kane 4 times before our final mission. We were told explicitly that pursuing the trafficking investigation would compromise critical operations. We weren't careless. We were set up. Warden Thompson studied the document, his administrative demeanor cracking further. These intelligence reports weren't included in the correctional briefing I received about Petrov's case. Because they were deliberately removed, Sarah said, just like current intelligence assessments are being modified to hide ongoing trafficking operations. And just like the evidence was removed from Operation Iron Shield after my unit was eliminated, the medical facility had grown absolutely still. Every person present was aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the medical technicians had stopped their routine monitoring, staring at Sarah and the saluting prisoner with undisguised astonishment. Chief Medical Officer Williams approached the administrative console. Warden, in light of this new information, I recommend immediate review of Petrov's medical status and potentially reassessing his correctional classification. Warden Thompson nodded absently, his attention still fixed on Sarah and the prisoner, who continued to maintain military bearing. Granted, all prisoner protocols will implement enhanced security review immediately. He paused, then added, Lieutenant Collins will remain under protective custody until these matters are resolved. As staff began coordinating the administrative changes, Sarah spoke again. There's something else you should know, Warden. She removed a final document from her identification case. This is the original authorization for Operation Iron Shield with your signature from when you served as military liaison. And this, she produced another paper, is the abort order that condemned my unit. The authorizing signatures don't match. Warden Thompson took both documents with trembling hands. Someone forged my signature on the abort order, he whispered, shock evident in his voice. Yes, Sarah confirmed. You've been carrying responsibility for a decision you never made. The abort order came directly from Colonel Kane's office. The retired Captain Martinez moved closer. I always questioned why you would authorize abandoning that unit, Thompson. It didn't align with anything I knew about your operational philosophy. Warden Thompson looked up, visible emotion crossing his face. I've spent 5 years believing I made a call that got 4 good soldiers killed. I authorized the mission coordination, but I never authorized abandoning them to die. The doors to the medical facility opened, and a team of federal investigators entered, led by a stern-faced senior agent. What is the meaning of this security alert? The agent demanded. Warden Thompson, I'm Agent Patricia Foster from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We received an anonymous intelligence package yesterday containing evidence of serious breaches of federal law involving Colonel Kane and weapons trafficking. I understand there may be connected evidence being reported in this correctional facility. Sarah smiled faintly, while prisoner Petrov finally relaxed his military posture. Right on schedule, she murmured. Agent Foster approached her. You would be Lieutenant Collins, formerly of Iron Shield. I would be. We have extensive questions for you, Lieutenant. Starting with how you survived and why you assumed false identity. And I have answers, Agent Foster. 5 years worth. The agent turned to address Warden Thompson. With your permission, I'd like to take custody of the evidence Lieutenant Collins has provided and arrange for her protection pending a full investigation. Warden Thompson nodded. Granted, but I want to be kept fully informed of any evidence relating to Petrov's case and potential security implications. Of course, Warden. It appears several ongoing operations have been compromised by the same source. The medical facility began to clear of non-essential personnel, but Major Voss remained at her workstation, looking shell-shocked. Sarah approached her quietly, while prisoner Petrov watched with respectful attention. I don't understand, Voss said, looking up at her. Why would you risk exposure? I'm the one who relayed the abort order that left your unit to die. Because you were another victim of the same corruption, Sarah replied simply. You followed what you believed were legitimate orders from a trusted superior. The guilt should rest with those who manipulated you, not those who were deceived. How can you be so certain I wasn't involved? Sarah allowed herself the smallest of smiles, glancing at Petrov, who nodded slightly. Because I've spent 5 years studying every detail of what happened. I know who gave the orders and why. I know who altered intelligence reports and who profited from the weapons sales. Most importantly, I know you requested confirmation twice because you suspected something was wrong with the abort order. Major Voss's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Those communications were classified. I had help, Sarah admitted. Not everyone in the military was compromised. There are still good people within the system who wanted the truth to come out, and who wanted to prevent other soldiers from dying because of corruption. As she prepared to leave with Agent Foster, the retired Captain Martinez approached. Lieutenant, he said formally, then dropped his voice. Sarah, we held a memorial service. I spoke about your dedication to the mission and to protecting innocent civilians. I know, she replied quietly. I read the transcript online. Thank you for honoring our sacrifice. What happens to prisoner Petrov now? Sarah looked at the security displays showing current facility operations, then glanced at Petrov, who maintained respectful attention. Now he receives proper protection and potentially becomes a witness rather than just a prisoner. The truth can emerge because someone finally spoke up. The medical facility remained suspended in a moment of shocked revelation. Warden Thompson slowly stood from his administrative console and removed his correctional insignia, setting them on his desk before stepping down to stand on the same level as Sarah. This facility recognizes Lieutenant Sarah Collins, presumed missing in action, recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor, he announced formally, his voice carrying a weight of regret and respect. The retired Captain Martinez approached Sarah and rendered a perfect salute, which prisoner Petrov echoed from his position. Others throughout the medical facility followed suit, a ripple of silent acknowledgement spreading through the room. Correctional personnel who had moments ago regarded her with skepticism now stood in recognition, honoring a fallen soldier returned from the dead. Major Voss, visibly shaken, stood to address Sarah directly. I never knew who actually gave that abort order. I've been carrying this guilt for 5 years, believing I contributed to your unit's death. I know, Sarah replied. Your voice on the command frequency that day. I heard your confusion. You questioned the order. Twice, Voss confirmed, her voice breaking slightly. They told me I was risking additional lives by questioning operational decisions, that the intelligence had confirmed the entire unit had been eliminated in combat. Warden Thompson's professional demeanor cracked as he turned to face the medical staff. I authorized Operation Iron Shield coordination based on weapons trafficking intelligence that indicated a high-priority target. I did not authorize the abandonment order that came later. The signature was forged. You've been living with guilt that was never yours to bear, Sarah confirmed. Colonel Kane used your administrative authority to cover his own criminal activities. Agent Foster stepped forward. Warden Thompson, I'd like to request a formal suspension of current operations while we secure this evidence and establish proper protocols for what happens next. This has implications for multiple ongoing cases and potentially dozens of personnel. Warden Thompson nodded. Current operations will continue with enhanced security protocols, but all prisoner classifications will be immediately reviewed for potential compromise. He paused. Major Voss, in light of the evidence presented, you are relieved of any responsibility for the Iron Shield incident pending complete review of the circumstances. As federal investigators began securing the medical facility and escorting people to debriefing areas, Sarah opened her identification case and carefully displayed photographs showing Colonel Kane meeting with known weapons dealers and enemy contacts. This was never about revenge, she said softly, addressing the room at large, while prisoner Petrov listened with respectful attention. It was about preventing other soldiers from dying because of corruption and about making sure the justice system can function with honest evidence rather than criminal manipulation. As she descended from the treatment area, her shadow stretched long behind her across the medical facility floor, the shadow of a soldier standing at attention rather than a contract nurse treating routine injuries. For a moment, she paused to look back at the security displays showing current facility operations and at prisoner Petrov, who maintained his respectful bearing. The medical staff was coordinating with proper information for the first time in years. Warden Thompson was directing operations with restored confidence in his security systems. Major Voss was working to identify other potentially compromised cases. Captain Martinez watched her from near the administrative console, his face reflecting a complex mix of pride and determination. Sarah gave him a small nod before continuing toward the exit with Agent Foster, while prisoner Petrov rendered one final respectful salute. Her mission wasn't quite complete. There would be extensive debriefings, federal investigations, and probably congressional oversight. The full scope of the corruption would need to be exposed, and those responsible held accountable at every level. But the most important part was accomplished. The truth was out, and soldiers could once again trust that their intelligence systems were working to protect them rather than serve criminal interests. As she reached the medical facility exit, a federal marshal approached. Lieutenant Collins, Agent Foster has arranged secure transportation for your continued protection. If you'll come this way. She followed the marshal toward the exit, conscious of the eyes following her progress. Medical staff, correctional personnel, security officers. For 5 years, she had lived invisibly, unremarkable and unnoticed, gathering evidence while pretending to be someone else. Now she walked openly, her identity reclaimed, her purpose fulfilled. The older veteran caught up with her just before she reached the exit corridor. Lieutenant, he said quietly, what you did, surviving, maintaining your cover, gathering evidence, coming forward at the right moment, it was extraordinary. I had a duty to my unit and to the soldiers who came after us, she replied simply. It was more than duty, he insisted. It was courage of the highest order, and intelligence work of a quality that saved lives. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. You taught us well, Captain. I taught you procedures and protocols, he corrected. What you demonstrated today, that came from within. He watched her leave with the investigative team, then turned to Warden Thompson, who had joined them. Some heroes never get the recognition they deserve, he said quietly. They just carry the weight of protecting others. Warden Thompson nodded, watching Sarah's figure disappear down the corridor. And some truths are worth waiting years to hear. The morning light continued to strengthen as Sarah's escort vehicle pulled away from Federal Correctional Institution Blackstone. Behind her, the medical facility buzzed with renewed purpose as correctional operations moved forward with proper security protocols and adequate administrative safeguards. The medical staff worked with restored confidence, knowing their assessments would reach security personnel without criminal interference. Ahead lay the challenge of ensuring complete justice was served and that the full scope of the weapons trafficking network was exposed and dismantled. But for now, in this moment between what was hidden and what would be revealed, the simple act of speaking truth had transformed a routine medical treatment into something profound. The power of one soldier's quiet determination to honor fallen comrades and protect those who came after, even when it meant sacrificing years of her own life, to gather the evidence necessary to expose a betrayal that powerful forces had tried to bury forever. As her vehicle reached the main gate, Sarah's radio crackled with an update from the medical facility. Prisoner Petrov has been reclassified for protective custody. Investigation proceeding with full federal oversight. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled for the first time in 5 years, knowing that this time, justice would be served and the truth would not be silenced again.